With this unit, we cross a divide, admittedly an artificial divide created by historians. Most historians date what they call early modern Europe from the Renaissance and modern Europe from the French Revolution. But the 17th century, which we've just dashed through, is a transitional century that laid the groundwork for what we now call the modern world. And I'd like to look at this transition through the lens of art. You've seen this painting, The Consequences of War, by Rubens before, although it wasn't a required work. The work proclaimed in art that war is stupid and destructive, and of course the great wars of the first half of the 17th century were fought over religion, although the pursuit of political power was often in practice a more important motive. Nevertheless, the bloody wars of religion did encourage many 18th century thinkers such as Voltaire and Locke to argue for religious toleration and to criticize the church for promoting conflict in what Voltaire at least saw as superstition. Stay tuned. These two paintings reveal another crucial 17th century transition. You should recognize Raphael's school of Athens, and I think you can guess the painter who executed the painting on the right. It's a Vermeer. Note the interior light cast by a window that fails to give a glimpse outside and the interior scene. What you probably won't know is that Vermeer's astronomer is reading a book that discusses modern astronomical discoveries by Copernicus, Galileo, and other leaders of the scientific revolution. We also see a modern, for the time, celestial globe. Raphael included plenty of scientists in his school, but they're all from the ancient world. Vermeer's scientist is a modern man. In fact, scholars think that his model was his friend van Leeuwenhoek, who invented a superior microscope and more or less founded microbiology. So, what's the word for science and reason that's based on observation and experiments involving the real world? You may have answered scientific method, and that's right, but the word I am looking for is empiricism. I just gave you the answer to the first question on tonight's homework. So Rachel Reusch's father was an empiricist. He cataloged the natural world in his laboratories, and his daughter captured that reality on canvas. There may be religious symbols in the grapes and wheat, but this painting is mostly about the natural world that we can observe with our eyes and maybe our microscope. So what point would you guess I'm making with these two slides? These two images, I mean. The 17th century saw much broader contact between Europe and the rest of the world. The encachado style of the screen attests to Mexico's contact with Japan via the Philippines, while the Ming jar in the Dutch still life was a treasured import from China. Growing knowledge and fascination with the rest of the world will become a more central theme as we move into the modern era. Okay, last blast from the recent past. What important 17th century development do you think I'm getting at here? Well, the 1600s witnessed the rise of powerful nation-states led by absolute rulers. And no one was more absolute than this fellow. And this work, which didn't show up at all in our last unit, and that's partly because the College Board didn't stick any French Baroque paintings on its list, not even this one, which was an old College Board favorite. But also because I decided to kick off this unit with the one French Baroque work on the list, the Palace of Versailles. But first, let's catch up with France and introduce Louis XIV. In France, the religious wars took the form of a civil war between the Catholics and the Calvinist Huguenots, who actually gained control of large chunks of France. Here you see a Protestant painter's depiction of one of the bloodiest episodes from the war, a massacre in Paris in which Catholics killed as many as 10,000 Protestants in a single day. Of course, Protestants killed plenty of Catholics too. But the theological and artistic battles that animated Italian, Flemish, Spanish, and even Dutch Baroque art seemed largely to pass France by. In France, politics usually trumped religion. Remember the Protestant Henry IV from the Marie de Medici series? He converted to Catholicism rather than fight a bloody battle to capture Catholic Paris. The real ruler of France under his son, Louis XIII, was a Catholic Cardinal Richelieu, who led France into the 30 Years' War on the Protestant side. Basically, Richelieu was more worried about Habsburg power than about Calvinist or Lutheran doctrines, or the approval of his alleged boss, the Pope. Louis XIII's son, Louis XIV, ruled France for 72 years. He came to the throne when he was only 7 years old, so he reigned for most of our Baroque century. Civil war broke out in France again when Louis XIV was a boy, this time because the French nobility was revolting against French royal power. Young Louis was forced to flee for his life. Louis XIV learned some important lessons from his turbulent youth, and when he came of age, he set about establishing strong, centralized rule that revolved around Louis XIV, the Sun King, the way the planets revolved around the sun. Yes, Copernicus had triumphed. In 1665, the Sun King summoned the famous Roman architect Bernini to France to design a new east facade for his palace, the Louvre. Here are some of Bernini's sketches for his proposed design. Note the curves, the alternating convex and concave facade. It all just seemed too Italian for French taste. So here's the design that won out in the end. You'll notice the same architects designed Versailles. Louis XIV rejected curves and high drama, and instead he went for classical, imposing, and horizontal. This is a building that exudes power. But Louis XIV still had a power problem. French nobles continued to resent the reestablished central royal power. Louis needed to keep his nobles under control, and he needed to keep them entertained so they wouldn't have time or resources to foment rebellion. This was his solution, a palace complex 11 miles from the hotbed of noble power in Paris. And here are the gardens. For some reason, the landscape designer doesn't appear in the College Board identifiers, but I'm sticking him in. So what do you notice about the design of these gardens as your eye moves from the formal gardens surrounding the palace back into the grounds? Nature near the palace is fully disciplined by royal power. As the gardens recede, they become more natural. But nature was not allowed all that much rain at Versailles. Laying out the gardens required enormous work. The original woods, grasslands, and marshes were covered with thousands of wheelbarrow loads of dirt. Trees were carted in from all the provinces of France, and thousands of men, sometimes entire regiments, took part in this vast enterprise. No single slide or pair of slides can really capture these gardens, so let's take a quick virtual tour. To get to Versailles, one entered through 3 roads that converged at the chateau, with the axes finally joining, not accidentally, in Louis's bedroom. Here are 2 more views of the imposing entrance. We see a few more Baroque touches in the gilding and the decoration surrounding the clocks, but the general impression is classical, stately, and horizontally massive. Again, this is all about the weight and might of royal power. So here's Versailles' most famous room, the Hall of Mirrors. Again, it was designed to dazzle in every sense of the word. And of course, the mirrors just magnifies the size of the room and the brilliance of the candlelit gold. The mirrors were also designed to reflect the magnificent gardens outside the windows. This room looks a little more Baroque with its curved ceiling and over-the-top decoration. And here finally is the Royal Chapel. It combines Baroque decorative opulence with a more classic and geometric design, but again, all about power. I'm going to move on now to my second lecture in the art of an aristocratic France whose days were numbered.